Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our training today on preparing for I-9 compliance. My name is Ken Spencer. I'm the president and CEO for HR Service. My pleasure to introduce you to our presenter today, David Norton. Our training today, we're going to go into a lot of details on how to be ready for any I-9 audits. We'll talk to you about details on how to prepare the do's and don'ts, or how to prepare your I-9 documents. David is a senior human resource business partner for HR Service. David has over 30 years of training and experience in human resources and compliance. He's a senior, has an SPHR certification in human resources, and a great background. David, I'm going to turn it over to you. I did want to mention, if you have comments and questions, feel free to put your questions in the Q&A section, and we'll pause periodically and address your questions as we go. David, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Ken. Good morning, all. Thank you for joining us for our webinar today. It's a very interesting and very active topic on I-9 compliance, and we're also going to be addressing immigration enforcement actions. Before we get going, the usual disclaimer that this is educational and information. We are not attorneys. We don't pretend to be attorneys. This is not legal advice. We will be sending out the slide deck to attendees later today. And again, please use the Q&A box on your screen to ask any questions that you may have. What we're going to be covering are updates to the I-9 compliance, how to properly complete and retain the I-9 forms, what to do about addressing common mistakes and errors that just creep in because we're human beings. What happens for non-compliance? What are the penalties and such? We're going to certainly talk about the increased external audits and enforcement actions that have been happening, and how to address that if you're involved in one of those. How to conduct internal audits. Talk a bit about electronic I-9 verification and the E-Verify system. And again, if you do have any questions, please pop those into the Q&A box. And again, we will be sending the slide deck out later on today. So, I-9's been around for a good long time. 1986, when Ronald Reagan was in charge. So, as part of the Immigration Reform Control Act of 1986, and there were two aspects to that the employers cannot knowingly hire undocumented workers or continue to employ them once they learn of an undocumented status that cannot be resolved with Social Security or other federal agencies, and that the tool to use for this verification is the Form I-9, and this applies to full-time, part-time, intern, whatever status, regardless whether they're citizens or permitted immigrants. There's a couple of parts to the Form I-9. The employee has to do Section 1 on their first day of work, and the employer has to turn around and do Section 2 within 3 business days of the employee's start date. So if you have someone start on a Friday, yeah, you can get it done on the following Tuesday. That still is within 3 business days. Okay, talk a bit about the most recent updated Form I-9. It's the one we have is dated August of 2023, and it expires May 31st, 2027. This is available on the USCIS website. There was a prior issue date of August 1st, which had a earlier expiration of July 2026. The new one has May 2027. Either form can be used. They're both okay. What did they change? USCIS, they reduced the sections 1 and section 2 to being just a single-sided page. It's no longer a 2-pager. And they made the form fillable on tablets and mobile devices. They also moved the section 1 prepare and translate a certification to a separate supplement because it just wasn't being used that often. But it's still there in its own section if necessary. The Section 3 re-verification and rehires became a standalone document. Employers can print that out or use it for re-verifications required, or if they rehire someone. The list of acceptable documents was revised to include acceptable receipts, particularly for those who are under age 18 and may not have all of the usual documentation that that us grown-ups have. Let's put it that way, and provides guidance and links to some information on automatic extensions. They cut it down from 15 pages to 8 pages, which is always a good thing. And there's now a checkbox for employers who are doing remote verification to use. So last December, Department of Homeland Security issued a final rule which extended employment authorization documents, or EAD, from a period of 6 months, 180 days, to 18 months, 540 days. And this is available for people who had done the Form I-765 after May of 2022. And employers can now accept the expired documents as long as the date of the review falls within this 540-day period. Now, having said this and having said that this is a final rule, under the new administration, legal challenges to this are virtually a certainty, and it will need to be monitored. Just things to be aware of. Talking now about the proper completion and retention. So, Section 1, that's the first page, or the top of the first page, I was saying, this is asking the employees fill this section in on their first workday. And are they a U.S. citizen, or are they certified, or are they certified to work in the country? It asks for this sort of information here, asks the people to sign and date it. We'll talk more, but this is a real common place where errors occur. They miss something, or date of birth is a common site for an error. They'll put day, month, year versus our standard month, day, year formatting. They'll not sign it, or they won't date it, and these are all considered errors during an audit, which could be considered a technical violation. Moving over to Section 2, this is the employer's responsibility. Employers need to do this, again, within 3 business days of the hire. Be a really good idea to put the company name and the employee name on top of each page of the document in case things get separated somehow. And employers need to be familiar with the acceptable documents. The list A are those things such as passports or passport cards, which will establish the identity and the employment authorization. List B are the photo IDs, government issued photo IDs, I should add. So school IDs are not permissible. And list C are the documents which establish employment authorization. That's typically a green card, a social security card, permanent resident card. There are a number of other cards which are available, but those are really the most common one. The photo ID, the driver's license or ID card, and a social security or a permanent resident alien card. Birth certificate certainly is another common one. So the employers need to examine each of the documents, make sure they're legitimate. Don't accept expired documents, but soon to be expiring documents are okay under this new final rule that we talked about a couple of slides ago. A receipt for a new social security card is acceptable, but the employee needs to bring in the actual new card once they get it. I had a situation I was dealing with recently where someone's driver's license had expired in 2013. Yes, 11 years ago. And they had a heck of a time going through it and getting all that done, but we were able to get that resolved eventually. So you want to fill in the document, the title, the number, the issuing authority. Here again is a place where errors commonly pop up, and you want to put it into the list A or the list B and C. You want to put in the first date of employment, certify that you've examined the copies and sign it, put the company information, your title and such. Then we go to the much lesser used section 3. It's now called supplement B, re-verification, rehire. And this is used when the employee's temporary work authorization expires and has to get updated, when someone's rehired within 3 years of their original I-9 completion date, or when there's a name change, typically through marriage or divorce or obtaining citizenship. Employment authorization docs and visas do need to be re-verified, but it's not necessary for expired passports, expired driver's license, and so on. Copies of supporting documents, that's often a question that comes up. The federal laws do not require companies to keep copies. Several states, however, do require that copies need to be copied and retained. It's always a good idea to keep the supporting documentation, and keeping it certainly can help your case in the event of an ICE immigration inspection enforcement action. For example, maybe you forgot to write down the expiration date of a driver's license. You have a copy of that license on file. That makes it a technical error rather than a substantive error, and the penalty is less considerably. Keeping the supporting documentation certainly helps facilitate any sort of internal inspections that you may be doing. And you want to store these supporting docs with the I-9 itself. Those need to be kept separate from the personnel files. If you're using E-Verify, you'd also want to be making sure that you're reporting the proper work authorization docs on that. We'll cover E-Verify in a little bit. Remote verification, as we have more and more people who have been working from home. This is a more common situation, and it's long been a challenge. There are a few workarounds for it. You can use a remote company representative. You can use a trusted agent, lawyer. You can ask them to go to a bank notary. It's also permissible to allow 2 remote employees to verify each other's documents. Now, that can be a bit risky because you could get a good buddy system in place. You could have people who don't really understand what they're doing, but it is a permissible option. You could have remote employees come on site for training and verify their documents at that point. But again, you've got the 3-day window to be doing it. And that can be problematic if the remote really is involving another state. If someone simply is working from home, but they're in the same city, you could ask them to come in because it's just a short drive, or even if it's a couple 3-hour drive, that's not bad. But if I know there's a lot of employers, HR service, we have employees in Utah, Texas, Ohio, New Jersey, a couple other states. So it's something to just be aware of. There also is a box on section 2 of the Form I-9, which needs to be marked off if you do a remote verification. So retention of the Forms I-9. You want to retain it for all the current employees, and for the former employees, you're going to hang on to it for 1 year after the date of the termination, or for 3 years after their date of hire, whichever is the longer period. So you may have someone who only works for you for a short period, a few months, a year maybe. In that case, the longer period is 3 years after their initial hire. But then if you have someone who's been around for a while, well past their 3-year anniversary. At that point, you can purge it out 1 year after they leave. Um, Once that retention period has been expired, you can then purge the documents. It's a good idea to get a second opinion, check with someone. That way you're never in a position of having to explain to the feds why you inadvertently purged the documents they're looking for. You want to be consistent, set it up. You're going to do a purge on a monthly, quarterly, annual, and sequence, whatever works for you. Failing to purge can lead to penalties and fines. Purging too soon can also lead to penalties and fines. So you need to get something within that timetable we spoke about. Just a moment, I'm going to slip back 1 year post termination or 3 years after the date of hire, whichever is the later. Okay, we're all human. Mistakes happen. Some common errors in the first section. Talked about that a little bit. Someone didn't check the box on their immigration status if it's applicable. They didn't sign it or they didn't date it. The address is incomplete. Maybe they put in their street, but they didn't put in the city, state, and zip code. Their social is missing. Their birth date is transposed or inverted. And these become even more important if you're using E-Verify, where you're having to look this stuff up to confirm on the E-Verify system. Section 2, that's the employers section. Some of the common errors here are there's information that's missing, in which case, okay, you want to make the changes that are needed, but do so in a different colored pen, a different font if you're doing it electronically, and then date it and initial it. See rather commonly over documentation. Someone decides I'm going to do the grand special here. I'm going to do list A and B and C. Problem is that that's a violation of the rules and can cause problems for you if you get audited. So if you end up with having all 3 columns filled out, you want to cross out the whatever is unnecessary, date and initial it. Don't white it out. That causes other problems, but just do a single line scratch out or X out, date and initial it. And then sometimes you get information entered on the wrong columns. Usually columns B and C get transposed, or someone will put a passport information in the column B and said, you just want to draw an arrow. And again, you're going to date it and initial it. So it's very clear that this was found. Here's a fun one. Falsified or fraudulent documents. HR teams are not expected to be immigration enforcement. So the employers need to accept the original documents if they reasonably appear to be genuine and they're related to the individual who is presenting the document. Now, if someone comes up to you and says that they're not authorized to work, or if in a much lesser case they say that they have provided false information, you need to terminate them. But you also have to give them the opportunity to prove that they have the correct documentation and the status has been regularized. And if all that happens, then you can continue employing them, even if they originally provided some false documents. They'd have to do a new I-9 and attach that to the old I-9 with an explanation. I ran into this 20-some years ago. It was spring of 2001. I had a person who was a very good worker, but he was illegal, and he did then finally come in with the proper documentation, and everything was okay. We did consult with legal counsel to make sure it was all on the up and up. Be aware that if your company has an honesty policy in place, you need to be consistent, which is saying that if you've terminated other employees for dishonesty, you probably need to do it in the same time here, not because they were undocumented, but because they were dishonest. You just be careful on these things. So what are some other errors that pop up? Don't ask your applicants to fill out the I-9 until the employment offer has been extended. I-9 is not a screening tool to be used pre-offer. You don't want to accept photocopied documents. You can photocopy them yourself and staple it to the I-9, certainly, but you're not going to accept a photocopy because they're just way too easy to do digital manipulation in this day and age. Remember that although we talked about passports, driver's license, ID cards, social security cards as being the uh, most common ones, um, there are other documents which are certainly permissible. Uh, don't refuse to accept these other documents. And again, don't accept anything which is expired and falls outside of the recent DHS guidelines that came out. Using out-of-date forms can be a problem. Make sure you've downloaded the most current one from the USCIS website. Failing to dispose of the I-9s after the retention period is a problem, as we mentioned. Make sure you're not keeping the I-9 in the personnel jacket along with their other documents. This needs to be kept separate, like you need to keep their medical and insurance and benefit stuff separate. There have been cases where people have just taken photos of the supporting documents but never actually filled in Section 2. Yeah, that's a problem. Not doing it within the 3-day window, that's a problem. So we also certainly want to make sure that more than one person is capable and trained on how to complete this. So if someone's on PTO, they're on business travel, the job is vacant, you're still able to comply with the requirements. And certainly you want to inspect the documents and make sure. So another really good idea, pardon?
David, we've had a couple of questions come in. I wondered if now might be a good time to have you address some of those before you got further down in.
Oh, okay, sure.
Okay to
Yeah,
have you hit
fine.
a couple of these? So one of them, you kind of covered this, but I wanted to bring it back to, do you need to still take copies of their ID along with the form?
Yes. Well, that's the recommendation here, because in case you're audited, it's really handy to be able to prove that you got the information right. It's not a federal requirement. There are some states which require it. About
Yeah,
11
and
or
it
12
seems like
states.
it seems like just be consistent. If you're don't do it for some and not for others, right? So if you're gonna do it for all, or if you're not gonna do it, don't do it for all too, right? I mean that's but it is a good idea to have it, right? Okay.
Yeah,
Um,
fair enough.
okay. Okay. How picky are they about a date signed by the company? I mean, so let's say you're out of town or something, and the person that was going to sign it and they miss it and they don't get it signed within the 3 days. Is that really a big deal? Does it have to be within the 3 days?
That's going to really depend on the personality of the auditor who comes in. We've all dealt with audits in our lives in various formats, and if you get someone who is really absolutely by the book, then yeah, it can be a problem. If you have someone who's a little more relaxed, maybe they'll let it slide. It's just a good idea in any case to have more than one person set up and able to do these compliances just in case these scenarios occur.
Because it does say within 3 days. So I mean, they
Yeah,
could assign
yeah,
a fine if it's not within three
yeah,
days. Boom, there's a fine, right?
yeah. And like I said, it certainly is very plausible that you get an auditor who is really absolutely gung ho and dedicated and is looking to find things, and there are others, and we've seen this, tax auditors, OSHA inspectors, any number of other, it just is part of life these days. It depends a lot on the rapport you can build and how you come across, and someone, yeah, there's way too much variability to say that it's safe to hold
Yep.
off.
What about seasonal hires? Say they're laid off for 3 to 4 months and then they're back to work again. Do they need to do when you rehire them? Do they have to? They're called back. Do they have to fill out a new form again?
No, no, as long as it's within that, what I think it was a 12-month window, or no, it was a 3-year window. Yeah, as long as they're within that period, we're fine.
Okay. If they make a mistake and crossed out with the same color pen, do they need to redo the I-9?
No, if you're initially doing it, it's only going to take 90 seconds to start it fresh. You might want to, but uh, it's easy enough. Just date an initial that the change was made. Whiteout is what gets them really excited. What gets the
Yeah,
auditors excited, but doing a strikeout so the original text is legible is fine.
and then make sure they initial any corrections that are
Yeah,
made.
yep, and date.
Okay. Uh, okay. Can we do the I-9 electronically, or do they need to be a wet signature?
Oh, absolutely. Electronic is the name of the game these days.
Okay. Is that David mentioned keeping copies of an employee's documentation with the I-9 forms. Are you saying not to keep the copies of the documentation in their personnel files? They says I keep the I-9 separate from their files. Is that okay to keep them separate?
Yeah, you'd want to keep the copies of the docs with the I-9. That way it's all tied together.
Okay, but it's okay to, some people will keep their employee files in one place and I-9s in another.
Yeah,
So
and
that's
and you
that's
want
not
to
a
you
problem.
yeah you'd want to keep their uh, documents in place um, with the I-9 again for audit purposes because that's why you have the copy of it as supporting for the I-9. Now maybe you need a copy of their driver's license because they're driving the company vehicle or something, and that you could keep that one in the personnel jacket. So you just take two copies of it.
Yeah, but it's not a bad practice if they wanted to have like a folder that has all their I-9s in, so if somebody's coming in just looking at the I-9s or something that
Hmm.
separate from their other folder.
Yep.
Let's see, versus copy. Let's see, can you take a picture of the document versus copying it in a copy machine?
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's fine.
If the employee sends in a photo of the Social Security and driver's license, do
That's
we
real common. And here's what I do is because I have clients in several states, and what I do, and this seems to work really well, is they take the picture of it, and you can figure out pretty well if it's a legitimate picture or a digital manipulation. I also ask them to send me a selfie with their face, and they're holding up the document like this right in front, so I can see, yeah, this is the same person. Um, because there is a scenario certainly where someone submits all the things, but the person doing the work is completely, totally different. I've had that happen just within the last year that we interviewed and hired someone, and the person who reported to work was a relative with the same name, but was not the interviewed person.
Yeah, I think we've kind of addressed this one. Can we keep a digital folder of I-9s together?
Sure.
I think we said we could that. Let's see, if someone's been employed for 20 years or more, and we do not, and I don't have an I-9, do I need to keep an I-9, get an I-9 form for them? So if
Yes.
you, so
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
if you don't have an I-9, even though they've been there a long time, you still need an I-9 form. Everybody
Yeah.
needs that.
Unless they were there for more than, let me do the math real quick in my head, what, 1986. If they were hired before November of 1986, you don't have to have it, but that's fewer and further between every day. And then we'll touch if people are able to see the screen, something like that. You'd want to write up a memo of correction, say, hey, the original I-9 was lost, misplaced, whatever. So this new one was done as a replacement.
Okay. In regards to purging I-9s, upon termination of employment, we currently remove the I-9 from our active employees I-9 notebook and put it into an archive I-9 notebook. We have never purged, as in destroying any I-9s. Is it okay? Is it an okay system, or should we purge the archived I-9s?
I would recommend getting a big paper shredder and shredding the things because if you're outside of the purge window, again, a very particular auditor could make that a failing and tag you for it. And really, what's the point of hanging on to that paper for all those years after the fact?
Well, you got a lot of confidential information on there, with
Yeah,
all the
yeah.
identity theft things that's going on. You've got all that critical information, birth dates, social security, all that stuff that people might get their hands on somehow, so why keep that around, right? So, okay. How do we check if our state requires us to keep copies of the ID forms or not? Because you had mentioned some of them require that.
You could, well, the very best way would be to contact HR service and ask for a help desk support. Failing that, you could Google it up and just say, I'm in the state of whatever, and I-9 retention, I-9 document retention. See what pops up.
Yeah. Uh, we don't need the actual documents to copy them. We can accept photo emails, correct?
Yes, yeah, that's just practical again because so many people have out of state workers these days.
Can these forms be completed electronically?
Yep, absolutely.
Press that. Regarding the suggestions to keep the I-9 separate from the other employee documents, what if all that information is kept digitally? What does separate mean in that case?
Well, that gets a little more problematic, but if you can put them into separate file folders within your drive, that ought to do the job.
What if the employee forgot sign and date? If they forgot to sign and date the document on page 1?
Well, if you catch it right away, you hand it back to them and say, sign and date here. If it's electronic, and again, it's still within that initial 3-day window, then you can still correct it during that period. But if you're doing an audit and you realize, hey, we hired this person in 2021 and they didn't sign it, then you'd contact them, have them sign it. You then initial and date it and do one of these memorandum of correction that's on your screen.
Okay. So David, we have quite a few more questions. I don't know if you
That's
want to
fine.
finish more or do you want to
Well,
keep cranking on questions?
yeah, it looks like we got a lot of questions. So let's take maybe 10 more and then we'll move on because I'm covering a lot of these things I think will be coming up.
Okay, I don't want to hold others up.
That's
We'll hit a few more questions and then we'll get you going here. But
okay,
I
fine.
have an employee who recently became a U.S. citizen. Do I need to reprocess the I-9?
You do the section 3.
Okay. Yeah, and that's one of the things. Sometimes if somebody came in with just a work authorization with the I-9, we have to track and monitor that to make sure that they're
Yeah.
still authorized to work in the U.S. So, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All of our I-9 forms are digital and are electronically signed. Is that acceptable?
Yes, absolutely.
What if the employee doesn't speak English and doesn't write well in their native language? Can the HR rep fill in the documentation portion for them if the employee still signs?
Yeah, because there's the supplement B, I think is what they call it now. There's the translator certification portion of it. You just have to fill that section in.
Okay, it says, please discuss the live video document verification as part of the alternative options.
Yeah, again, that's very common. What I do myself is I use a screen capture tool. I have the person hold up the document, that's just blacking it out because I've got the background, but you get the idea here. I have them hold it up and then I do a screen capture of it, ideally with their fingertip in it so we can see, and I have them then do the back side of it as well. And just make a note, you fill in that box in section 2 saying virtual verification.
Do Social Security cards expire?
Nope.
Only when they die.
Yep. Yeah.
If I find errors on old forms, like 1996, should I have the employees complete a new form or use the re-verification?
I would just make the correction on it and again put this memo of understanding. Let's do 2 more, Ken, and then kick back into the main presentation because
Okay.
we're not even halfway through.
Okay, sounds good. It's okay to keep your questions coming. We'll hit them, but we'll finish the presentation and we'll come back at the end and hit the other questions. So we'll do two more.
Yep.
What is the employee? What is the employee? Okay, what if the employee is given the I-9 to complete on their first day of employment, but they don't have the physical ID with them? Can you give them the 3-day window to produce the physical ID?
Yes, absolutely, because it's the employer has that 3 days to verify the ID information. So yeah, that's fine.
If all the documentation is provided prior to the start date, is it acceptable for the employer to type all information on the I-9 and just have the employee sign and date it?
Yeah, I suppose yeah, that'd be fine.
Okay. All right, David, let's go ahead and we'll turn it back to you, and we'll come back to the remaining questions at the end.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so we talked about the memo of correction here, and there we are. All right. Another tool, the USCIS website has a manual, M274, which is a free download. It's a government document, so it's pretty thick. Make sure you get the most recent edition, and this gives all sorts of information here. Segueing over here to penalties for non-compliance. What happens if we make a mistake? For the paperwork violations, if you're going nice on you, it's $281 each, up to $27.89. For substantive violations or uncorrected technical errors. Others go from 698 to 55, almost 5,600, and then subsequent offenses go up to almost 28,000. So this can be really costly, and this is per form, per unauthorized worker. So if they come in and they find that you've got 20 or 30 I-9 forms that are incorrect, oh boy, that's going to be a challenge. Trying to, people say, what happens if, well, I'm going to fake it and try and fudge it? Boy, that just makes things worse. Companies can be punished for subsequent offenses, trying to mislead investigations, ignoring things that, it's really obvious. They give you a social security card and the ink is literally still wet on it. Like, come on, we have to use some judgment here. But employers do try and do this. Increased external audits and enforcement actions. This is something we're seeing on the news. The increased on-site inspections are happening right now. This is something that President Trump has pledged to deport millions of undocumented workers, and it's absolutely happening quite literally as this webinar is going on somewhere in the nation. The I-9 audits usually starts off with getting a subpoena from the Department of Homeland Security. Employers are only given 3 days to produce all the I-9 docs for their current and former employees. And as we mentioned a couple of slides back, the penalties can get up to nearly $28,000 for hiring undocumented workers. The areas which are being focused on initially, I don't want to use the word targeted, but focused on: construction, landscaping, meatpacking, manufacturing, restaurants, bars, hospitality, agriculture are the most likely ones that being paid attention to these days. Inspections, surprisingly, are triggered by internal complaints. Again, going on my own history from many, many years ago, we had a situation where someone knew that an employee was undocumented, illegal. They mentioned it to their supervisor, who said, yeah, he's a good worker, never mind. Well, that person contacted immigration, and as you might imagine, lots of activity for the next 6 months. We'll leave it at that. Federal inspections done on-site. Again, the 3 days notice is standard for an on-site inspection, but special circumstances, whatever that might be. that can cause it to be waived. Um, in California, Oregon, employers are required to post notices if they get a notification of an inspection. These notifications from the feds have to be, again, the 3 days, and it needs to be response sent by certified mail. Big thing, and we questioned this or talked about this on one of the questions. If the primary is unavailable, if they're on PTO, they're on travel, the job is vacant, have a backup person in place for doing this. Um, the audits, again, the 3-day notice. Site visits are often scheduled in advance, tied to H-1B visas, E3, L1 audits. Then there's the immigration raids, enforcement actions. These are more aggressive and demanding. ICE could be looking for a specific person or conducting a general raid. And these are often, as we've seen on the news, they're much more aggressive. We just have to be aware of this. If you do have an immigration enforcement action happening, there are certain rights that the employers do retain. For public areas, of course, the full access has to be given. If there are private areas, the access is prohibited as long as the area is marked off, private area, no access. If they have a judicial warrant, that supersedes that. Administrative warrant doesn't have the same weight. Your best move really is to comply with these guys and sort out the details and the legality later on with your legal counsel if it gets to that. But the ICE, they don't have the automatic right to enter the non-public areas. Do make sure that you have one of your own staff with them and politely taking notes and such on these things. That's the next slide here. It was here somewhere. Stay calm, cooperative, and courteous. You want to review any documents that they present, make note of any interactions, answer the questions. Make sure you're only answering the questions asked. Don't volunteer information. Because that again, just all the things your corporate attorney would say is just answer what you're asked. Don't volunteer things beyond that. Some things to be doing in advance to keep in mind on these things. You want to clearly designate your private or non-public areas. You want to have at least 2 contact people, again, if someone's unavailable, they're on travel, on vacation, whatever. Make sure your reception staff, if you have any, they know how to respond. Because it could well be that the first notice they have is 7 guys showing up, armed with bulletproof jackets on and helmets saying, "We're coming in now." Make sure people know how to deal with this. Have legal counsel already lined up for how you're going to respond. Let them come in, let them do the enforcement. This is absolutely their right to do this, no question there. But make sure that you have legal counsel lined up to help you respond to it. You want to do internal audits. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. And if you have sponsored employees, you want to make sure that you're verifying that their information is all still current. Signing up for E-Verify is a good idea. That helps, and it goes well with the enforcement actions. Make sure you've identified critical jobs if a replacement might be necessary. You want to take a look at the indirect impact, spouses, children of undocumented workers. Well, if mom gets deported, probably dad does as well. If you have a child of a family working, particularly for those who are fast food or businesses that have the under 18 workers, they could be go out as well. Things to be aware of. There are some of the previously permitted programs could become terminated. There's the EAD for the H-4 spouses. A lot of talk about the DACA program for temporary protected status, F1 students. These are all things which have been considered for termination or serious revision under the new the new federal administration. Internal audits. This is absolutely the best way to figure out if you have any potential liabilities and find any errors. You're already prepared, and how often you should do an audit kind of depends on your company size. If you have 20 or 30 people, probably not a big deal. If you're in a business that has a lot of staff turnover, like restaurants or manufacturing, you probably want to audit a couple times a year. You'd want to hire an external third-party trained specialist, maybe an immigration attorney, to do this. This is a service HR Service offers. Ken will be speaking more about that in a little bit. If you do keep the process completely in-house, make sure that the person in charge of auditing the forms is not the same person who filled them out in the first place. Otherwise, you get a excuse me, a conflict of interest thing going. Good idea to have an immigration compliance policy in place. Helps you to act consistently. It certainly makes a good impression on the feds if they come in. Things that you want to be considering in your policy statement. Who oversees the compliance? Do you retain the supporting documentation? If so, where and how? Do you use E-Verify? Some states that's required. Some states it's not exactly prohibited, but it's not necessary. Who oversees the retention policies? Who has to be contacted in case there's a notice of inspection? How do you deal with outside contractors? Let's say you've got a job site and you've got a subcontractor coming in and doing stuff, and are you checking that they only have legal workers? Are you training your staff on how to complete the I-9s? How often are you doing the internal audits? Who has access to the I-9s? Who does the re-verifications? And do you have zero tolerance for employment of individuals who can't comply even after they're given a reasonable period to comply? So lots and lots of stuff here. E-Verify, we'll touch on this a bit. This is an online system confirming employment eligibility. It's administered by USCIS and the Social Security Administration. Provides quick confirmation, and it certainly reduces the risk of your hiring unauthorized workers. The process to get set up, you'd go to the e-verify.gov website, set up an account, fill in the memo of understanding, designate the users, go through the training cycle. It's about a 30-minute training with a quiz at the end of it that people need to go through. Make sure you integrate the E-Verify to the hiring process, update your policies. So these are all the steps. How does it work? Well, when the I-9 is completed, the employer gets the information, you then log it all in. It's a very, very fast system. It takes 2 or 3 minutes typically per employee. The outcomes that you're going to get, most desirable certainly is employment authorized. A tentative non-confirmation is the employee has 8 working days to resolve it with Social Security. Real common reason for this is that there's a marriage, is a name change. You'll get name spellings. For example, my middle name is Dennis, D-E-N-I-S, just a single N, but most people spell it with a double N. Well, that causes problems if someone keys in the double N and instead of the single N. Or you get the final non-confirmation, someone's not authorized to work at all. Again, make sure you're using the E-Verify only for new hires. Notify the employees promptly if there's a non-confirmation. And again, it's not a pre-employment screening tool in any way. You want to be training the staff on how to use that, those who are going to be doing it, internal policies. As with anything electronic this day and age, the software updates, so make sure you've downloaded the most current client most current program, I should say. A little bit about electronic signatures. We were touching on this before with the electronic completing things online. Make sure that whatever platforms you're using, the e-signatures transfer over as well. We've run into a couple even just this year, and I don't know the software itself, but where the form transferred over, but the signature for some reason was suppressed by intent. And all these electronic systems have to be able to print the form with legible signatures. There should be a log showing when the signature was applied. The software does this automatically. And anything that's quirky on this, yeah, it can cause issues if you have an audit. If the electronic signature on file doesn't meet any of these things, you probably want to have a new I-9 done. So heading to the wrap up here before we do the next stage of Q&A, and I realize I've kind of blitzed through this second half, but you want to have a plan in place. Make sure your HR staff or other staff are aware of the compliance responsibilities, especially if it's an audit or an enforcement action for sure. Make sure things are completed, stored properly. Use technology where you can to streamline things. Okay, let's head over to Q&A part 2.
So, David, because we have so many questions, if you don't mind, let's finish out
Sure.
the rest of our slides.
Yep, fine.
And I just want to make sure we kind of cover everything here, and then we'll do our questions because some of the folks may need to leave. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone understands a little bit about who we are really quickly, and a little bit, just so in case others want some other help from us. So we HR Service, we offer a number of solutions. I'll just tell you really quickly because we know you're here to learn about I-9 forms, not really about us. So I'll just very quickly hit this. But we have a number of things available here if you need some help. Of course, I-9 auditing is something we can help you with. So if you need some help with your I-9s or you have other follow-up questions beyond today, we're happy to help you. Or if you need some auditing or help with that, so keep us in mind. But we do have also packages available. So if you need some outsourced HR help where you want somebody to be part of your team or act as your part-time HR manager, we can do that. We have some software solutions where we can you can log in and get the kind of help you need to manage your HR. We also have projects where you can come in. We can fix a handbook or design a comp plan, or we can help you with recruiting or do training. And then we also have benefit compliance solutions where we can take care of your summary plan descriptions or your premium only plan documents or your notices. We do Affordable Care Act reporting or 5500 reporting. And we do also have administration for flexible spending accounts, health savings accounts, COBRA administration, those kinds of things. David, if you go to the next slide, we have a new solution that's out where we can actually complete an overall human resource audit. We can help you understand where you are in compliance with all of your employment laws to kind of know where am I at a glance. Where do I stand right now in my compliance with all of my human resource areas? Am I missing something? Do I need to, am I at risk of fines and penalties or violation of any compliance laws? Or am I missing other important human resource practices? So this is a really nice tool that's available, very cost-effective audit that's available for only $5.99. So it's a really attractive audit that's available out there right now. So let us know if this is something you'd be interested in. The next slide gives you some contact information for that. 833-685-8400 extension 2 is the phone number you would call, or you'd email solutions@hrserviceinc.com. We'll leave that up while we go through and address these other questions now. So with that, I'll come back to we got quite a few other questions, so we'll go ahead and hit these for you now. David, what is an employer's culpability if false documents were unknowingly accepted? What are some of the risks to employers?
Well, again, it depends. It's a matter of if it's a one-off situation and someone slid under the radar, okay, well, it happens and you're probably going to be okay. But if you have a situation where a reasonable amount of due diligence told you that something was amiss, for example, true story, an employer that I was dealing with some while ago, um, they had about 20 or 30 employees with absolutely sequential social security numbers. Now, that strikes me as being pretty darn statistically unlikely. But they said, yeah, this is all fine. There's no problem. That might be a hard sell.
Yeah. Okay. Um, we are able to verify ID remotely without using E-Verify.
Yes, that's correct. You just mark the box on section 2 of the I-9.
Okay. If we have long-term hires, how frequently do we need to have them complete it again?
Never. Once is enough as long as the employment's continuous.
Okay. Can we please clarify the 12-month rehire instructions again? We have a lot of people who come and go in construction. Okay, so you just said that. They don't ever have to do that again.
Well, no. If you're doing a
Oh, it's a rehire.
separation, yeah, separation and a rehire in the 12 months, like you've got, oh gosh, Christmas help, store Santa Clauses. You've got lifeguards at the swimming pools in the summertime, things like that. You can go ahead and just keep that because you're bringing them back. But if you've gone a couple of years without having someone come back, do it again. But the 12 months, they pretty much built that in, realizing that you're hiring lifeguards, you're hiring Santa Clauses.
Okay. This is, do they require NA in fields that are blank?
The old system, yeah, you did have to fill in NA all over the place. The new system, you don't. That was one of the revisions that got made in 2023.
Is the rehire section required for seasonal workers called back after a layoff?
That's on the 12-month thing we just talked about.
Okay. I'm not clear if I can look at documents such as a license or social security card online, such as via Zoom, or if I need to have a third party do that physically for me.
Again, what I've done hasn't been an issue yet is that you're doing it on Zoom, you have the person holding it in their hand so you can see that it's a legitimate document. And they flip it back just as if they were sitting across the desk from you, but they're doing it in pixels versus flesh and blood.
So it used to be, David, that they had to be physically there, and
Yeah,
they used to hold really hard to that, and then COVID hit, and then they got a little more flexible and stuff. Are
yeah,
you saying that they're staying flexible on that, or is it still a
yeah.
little?
That's my understanding. And again, I will do a screen grab of the employees of that document, and I will make sure that I get a fingertip in that screen grab so that they can see. The concern obviously is that there's a whole lot of woofy um, questions or document manipulation online. If someone's really, really good at that, you can completely fake it. But if you're doing a call like we're doing right now here on Zoom or on Teams or whatever, and you can see, yeah, this is a legitimate document, and you can do a screen grab of it, that should be fine. Again,
Okay.
I'm saying should be weasel words, but it depends on how particular a given auditor might be, and if a given auditor feels like being very, 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 very by the book, but it's probably a safe practice.
Okay, here's one that says the USCIS website says electronic signature is not acceptable. You were saying that it is fine, so I just want trying to make sure that this is accurate because this is an issue we are concerned about if we are audited. So our
Well,
electronic signatures.
there's lots of programs that have the documents done electronically. So that's interesting because I know there's lots and lots of services that do it all electronically these days.
Okay. And I did want to just mention, we are at the hour. We had advertised this staying within an hour. We're fine continuing to answer questions, and we'll go through these. So I just wanted to let everyone know we're at the hour. You're welcome to stay, and we'll continue answering questions as long as you're okay, David.
Sure.
Okay. Let's see. Can the I-9 be a copy for the file? We have the location scan the documents and then destroy, and then we keep the copy of the I-9 as the official I-9 document.
Yeah, that should be fine. Don't see a problem with that.
What are the fines and penalties if an auditor reports the employer I-9s are not signed within 3 days?
Well, it's going to depend on the volume of it. If you have one, it's probably going to be a small fine, a couple $100. It can get up pretty high if they're sitting there and saying you have dozens or hundreds that weren't signed within 3 days. And again, did you miss it like it was 4 days because someone was out, or was it 4 months?
It used to be a certain dollar amount per everything that they would find, so
Yeah,
they would look at how many days, and there would be a dollar amount per day missed.
yeah,
And then they would find, and they'd look at all documents. So they'd look at every single thing that they would find, and there was a dollar amount
yeah.
for everything they'd find. You were missing a signature here, you had 2 days you were missing here, and then, so there'd be a dollar amount for every single thing they would find. So, and I'm sorry, I don't remember the exact dollar amount
No,
either.
neither do I. But it's in the slides here. So when we send copies of the slide deck out, they'll be there.
Then you've got it in there. Okay.
Yeah.
We'll also send a link of a copy of this recording. So if you had someone you wanted to see this and they missed that, you'll have that available too.
Yeah.
Please restate the process for missing I-9s. Maybe a little quick summary.
Yeah,
If they're missing I-9s, what are they?
you're going through it, you're auditing it, and you want to make sure you found someone that's missing. You'd have them fill in a new one, and then you do that memorandum I mentioned at the prior Q&A section, and just attach that to it and say, hey, this is what happened.
If an employee was hired 5 years ago, why would we get the I-9 now as if it had been purged?
Why would it have been purged? You have to keep the I-9s for all your active employees for the life of their employment plus 1 year past termination.
Okay. What about a second recertification? Where do we enter that information?
You print off a second copy of section 3. So you'd have 2 section 3s.
If we hired someone 7 years ago and we have an older I-9 form for them, do we need to update their I-9, or do we just keep the initial I-9 on file?
Just keep the original one. No need to update it for people who've been around for a while.
To confirm, we must copy Social Security cards and driver licenses to store for I-9 compliance.
If your state requires it, yes, it is not a federal requirement. It is a really good idea, but it's not a requirement.
How do you fix an I-9 mistake by an employee that has been terminated?
Same way you fix any other. The person doing it, the HR person or manager or whoever, makes the correction and dates it, signs it, or initials it and dates it.
If one of the documents is a resident alien and a temp Social Security card, I just noticed the card is expired, like I took over this job, I need to ask to see his updated card, correct?
Yes, if the expiration is less than 540 days, 18 months. I just sidebar request. You're deleting these questions real fast as we're going through, and you just wait until I answer it because that way I'm seeing what's going on.
Okay.
But sorry, I lost my train of thought. There's the new 540-day limit. If it's within that window, you're probably okay, as long as the document the expiration was after May of 2022.
Okay, thank you. On Ohio, we do not have to e-verify. Would you recommend that we do anyway? Why or why not?
Uh,
So e-verify.
yeah, it's it looks good in case you get an audit or an enforcement action. You're not required to do it, but you're not prohibited from doing it either. It certainly is a good way of making sure that you have uh, that the people who are signed up are in fact authorized. You're not being given false documents.
Okay. If we have a few buildings, even different states, do I need to have the I-9 at the building the employee works at, or just at our headquarters?
You just keep it at the headquarters. You don't need to have it at each separate building, but it does need to be accessible electronically in case you get an audit.
Okay. We are signed up to verify with Social Security. Will this work for I-9 verification?
Partially, because that way you're verifying if someone presents a social security card, but what if they present a permanent resident ID card, or they present a passport, which isn't tied into the social security at all?
We have very remote work sites. There are only 2 admin employees at our location. What are the rules when we are required by contract to notify the landowner prior to allowing any inspections by government agencies and must wait for landowner permission?
All right, let me look at this one. That's a longer one. What are the rules when we're required by contract to notify the landowner prior to allowing any inspections and must wait for landowner? Well, it's going to be up to the landowner to the landowner to explain why he didn't allow a government agency to do an inspection. So yeah, you would notify them, and your obligation is to notify the landowner. And if they don't provide the permission, I don't think that's going to go real well with the feds, but maybe.
Okay. Do contract 1099 NEC employees who do things like childcare need to fill out I-9 forms?
They are independent contractors, they're not employees, so
They don't
not
have
an
to.
issue.
Okay. I heard that once you choose to start e-verify, you always have to use it moving forward. Is that correct?
Yes and no. Once you start doing it, you need to keep using it. You can then decide to stop using it, but you can't cherry pick and say, okay, I'm going to e-verify everyone whose last name starts with a, B through Q and not e-verify everyone else, or I'm going to e-verify people who were born in months ending in an R or something like that. So you just have to be consistent. You're either going to use it for everyone or not use it for everyone.
Does the same person who verifies and signs I-9 need to enter information into e-verify, or could someone else just enter the completed I-9 information into e-verify?
Completely discretionary, whatever works.
So if I have to monitor all the I-9 documents and have the I-9 updated, like driver's license expires every 4 years, so every 4 years I need to update the I-9s?
No, again, on one of the prior slides, I mentioned things which do not need to be renewed, and driver's license, passports, social security cards, things like that. When you get the slide deck, it'll be on there saying what has to be re-verified and what does not.
If an original form ID used on the I-9 expires, do you need to update with a renewal ID?
Yes. Yeah, but because if it's expired, you need to get the um if it expires, then you need to get a valid replacement.
Okay, let's see. That's a long one. I'm sorry, we're not going to be able to hit every one of these, so I'm going to skip some of these really long ones. can we get this? Okay, we'll be sending out the videos and audios. I have an employee who we are sponsoring for her green card passport just expired. Do I need anything else? Do I write down her I-79A on the I-9.
Yeah, you would just complete whatever documentation is appropriate for the to complete the Form I-9. There's that long list on I think the fourth page saying which documents are permissible.
Okay, some of these comments say don't purge them in each personnel file. Other comments say you can keep them in each personnel file. Why would we not put them in the personnel file and then purge and so we can purge easier?
Okay, in general, personnel files that you should have two for each employee. One is for their work information. This is their job title, their application, their promotional, their performance reviews, disciplinary actions if there are any, things that are work related. Okay, this is for the person as an employee. Over here, you've got a different one, and this is their personal information. And the I-9 with their social security and their driver's license would fall on this, along with their medical enrollment, their tax thing, their direct deposit information. So you got the one form, the one folder here for everything as an employee that the supervisors, managers would have access to, and this is the more confidential stuff that needs to be treated more sensitively.
Okay. I just took over the HR position, and we have some employees that I can't locate the original I-9. What do I do?
Have them fill in a new one, do a memo of correction as we discussed earlier, and just staple it to it. Say, hey, we did an audit of the I-9s. We found that we didn't have one. This new one is a replacement.
If you have an employee of 10 years whose driver's license expired, do you need a new I-9?
No, you do not.
Okay, what do they do? What do they do for that driver's
Well,
license?
again, as I've said, driver's licenses are not something that you need to worry about renewing. Passports, you don't need to worry about renewing. Once it's done, it's done.
Okay. When you e-verify, should you keep the verification with the I-9?
What I do is I either write or type the e-verify case confirmation number on the form, and that way you've got the record of it.
What is the process for when a passport or ID expires? Do we have to get a new one on file?
For a passport, for a driver's license, you do not have to. For a alien registration card, for work authorization, you do. Again, all of these things will be in the list that we provided.
What if an employer did an internal audit and choose to redo all I-9s regardless if they had them on file or not, and were signed on the day we redid them all on all employees? Are those all invalid? What if those were created because original I-9s were missing or lost?
Again, you'd want to do a memo of correction, attach it to each I-9, and explain it if you have an auditor come in as to what happened and see what their response is.
If we hire them every year, but the I-9 form expires in May 2027, do we need a new one?
No, because once it's filled in, you don't have to redo them every time the form redoes. We have people who have been working for companies for 20, 25 years, and they're still using the old original one. That's still perfectly legitimate. But you want to make sure that with new hires, you're using the correct updated form.
Employee has a permanent resident card that expires. I'm assuming I need to get a copy of his new permanent resident card once the other one expires. What grace period is there for permanent resident cards?
And I believe the permanent resident card is on the, you don't have to worry about renewing like a driver's license. But if it does have a grace period thing, it's the 540 days, 18 months.
Should we be checking active employees' I-9 documentation to see if it is now expired, even though it was it was not at the time they received the job?
That's taking now expire. Yes, yeah, because if they used a work authorization, you want to go through and make a note. It'd be a good idea to have a logbook or an Excel file that you can just keep track of if there are people whose authorization is expiring.
Does HR need to have the employee fill out a new I-9 when documents like driver's license, passports, et cetera, expire, or do corrections need to be made to the original I-9? I think we've already answered this.
No, they do not need to do it for the driver's license, the passports and such don't need to be updated.
Okay, I think we've answered this one. Does the employee's start date filled out in section 2 by employer need to be the same day as the employee's signature in section 1?
No, it needs to be the start date. So if someone filled it out, I've seen cases where someone is being efficient, they're doing the onboarding paperwork on Friday and the person's going to start work on Monday. And they signed it on the Friday, but their start date is the Monday. That's fine.
Okay. As long as the person comes back within 12 months, 12-month window of leaving or layoff, neither a new I-9 or the rehire section is required, correct?
That's correct.
If an existing employee's working visa expires and they send us a new one, do we need to redo their E-Verify or just add it to their personal folder?
You do the section 3 update.
What circumstances would the automatic extension apply to?
Again, there's a list of documents that when you get the slide deck, you'll be able to look. I just don't remember off the top of my head exactly which ones, but those are the ones that under the Department of Homeland Security final rule, they said that there's a 540-day extension. Others you don't need to worry about. Those are the driver's license, passports, even though they expire, you do not need to get a new one for that.
Right. Hey, well, David, we've hit all of the questions. Thanks, everyone, for joining our webinar today. And thank you, David, for your
Certainly.
great presentation and answering all the questions. And we appreciate the opportunity to go through this today. And please let us know if we can help with any of the other solutions we can help you with.
Very
Have a great
good.
afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Goodbye.